Hello, welcome back to the third episode in the Human Factors as part of CSC 280, the Introduction to Cybersecurity at Delphi University. As I mentioned, we are talking about human factors in cybersecurity or in administrative controls. In the first video we outlined what these administrative controls entail, policies, procedures, standards and guidelines. In the second video we outlined how we can raise awareness that these policies exist and what subjects they cover, how we can train people in the right steps to follow in being in compliance with the policies and the procedures, and then third, to educate them as to why and how we made these decisions. In this video we'll talk more about the opposite of following the rules. We talk about breaking them. So we have all these controls, administrative controls, rules are one of them. And what is important to realize is that administrative controls target people. And so we mentioned this in the first video. We said people can make mistakes or people can have malicious intent. Now, we can break down the malicious intent as well. We can talk about malicious insiders, for example, disgruntled employees. People who are part of my organization but are unhappy and want to take it to a point that they want to sabotage things or want to purposely bypass restrictions because for whatever reason they feel that they are entitled to do so. The other one is the outsider, and we talked about those earlier on as well. Outsiders include criminals who are after money, nation-state activists who are either after military or governance objectives or who are after intellectual property, hacktivists who are motivated by ideology, and script kiddies who are typically motivated by curiosity, like, oh cool, let's see what happens when. Understanding how they are motivated can also help understand to what extent these people are willing to bypass our administrative controls. Malicious insiders have the highest damage potential. They know the most about the organization, and to a really real extent they have the most to lose, because often if they get caught it means end of employment or maybe even getting sued over certain things and ending up in jail. Insiders also know what the policies, the procedures and the guidelines are, and which means that if they have the intent to bypass them, they are most suitable to do so. We can minimize the risk of insider abuse, often, like I said, through these hiring procedures, by close monitoring, by continuous awareness and training, but we can never completely exclude the fact that an insider goes rogue and causes damage, and in that case it's going to be a difficult problem to solve. Now, a human can have all kinds of targets. They can have physical targets, they can have technical targets, but they can also have human targets. We've learned that humans are, in many cases, the weakest link in our security posture. And if humans attack humans, they do that typically through something called social engineering, where we use social skills, whether it's manipulation or conviction or lying or cheating or whatever it may be, to influence the behavior of someone else or a group of other peoples. Now, good social engineers can be incredibly useful, and I've linked here to a video, and I'll put a card above it as well, which is absolutely worthwhile reading. It is a lecture, short-ish, by a person who used social engineering skills for a good part of his life to basically travel across the world without paying for it. Or later he got caught and he turned his life around and started working for law enforcement, but it's absolutely worth watching that video. It should give you a real strong indication as to what people can do when they set out to cheat. Now, a Trojan is in many ways a very simple form of social engineering, also a fairly obvious one. It basically means that I'm going to give something to you and say, oh cool, look, here, run this program. It's a fantastic game. And it will be a game. Whether fantastic or not, that's up to you. But it has additional functionality. For example, it might be a game that's fun to play, but at the same time it's a game that's also downloading your password store and offloading it somewhere else. So it is running software or other things that claim to be one thing, but also have some other functional component to them. In some cases these are really hard to recognize, because in the end you're getting what you ask for. You're playing that game, it's just also doing something else. It's not necessarily a problem of technology, it's the fact that you as a human didn't recognize the threat and decided to go ahead. Other examples could be, for these browser plugins that are coupon toolbars, where, oh look, install this toolbar onto your web browser and you get free coupons. Like, yeah, that's true, but at the same time, every web page you visit and every form you submit is also sent to a third party for review and mining. So maybe it's not the greatest deal, and maybe free isn't really as free as you thought. So that's a clear example of Trojaning. More in the physical realm is tailgating. It basically means following someone when they hold the door open for you. In many cases we have firewalls upon firewalls and intrusion detection systems, but if I keep my sticky notes on my screens that have my username and password written on them, my firewalls are not going to help me much. And so if I can gain access to a facility, for example by dressing up nicely in a suit, and when a smoker goes back inside and holds the door open for me, I have access to the facility, and I might have access to physical data that's written on sticky notes, on whiteboards, on sheets of paper that are laying around the office, you name it, and there's probably a potential there for data disclosure. So sometimes we say, in order to defend against that, all employees have to visibly wear a badge, and employees are instructed to challenge anyone who is not wearing the badge visibly. That works to an extent if it's actually done, but in reality most people are not terribly confrontational and will let anyone in, and if they don't see the badge they might just assume like, oh, it might have just shifted and I can't see it, but rather than say, oh, there's an intruder here. Badging is really limited in its effectiveness unless everyone follows up on, hey, where is your badge? And that's called tailgating. If you're accessing a facility, or if you're close to someone who's using a system, you can just look over their shoulder, as they are typing their username and password, or as they are pulling up customer records on their screen. If you are there, you can see the screen. You can see what they're typing. And this is exactly the reason why when you type a password into a web browser, you should see these little balls or asterisks, but not the letters that you typed. And the whole point there is that if someone's close enough to see what you're doing, at least they can't see your password that's supposed to be a secret. So that's called shoulder surfing. And again, not a whole lot you can do against it, other than making sure that you're aware of your surroundings. Dumpster diving is another one. As people, for example, right now we're in the middle of COVID, people work from home a lot. At work I might print certain things because sometimes it's easy to work on paper than it is on a screen, and that might be confidential data, but I also know that if I get rid of that paper I have to shred it, and I bring it to a shredder. If I'm at home I might just dump it in the recycle bin or in the garbage can, and I might not take the same level of precautions as I would at work, maybe because I don't have a shredder at home, or I'm not willing to buy one or use my own for work purposes, whatever it may be. But that means that someone who's going to literally dive through my dumpster or check my garbage could be potentially finding out things that they should not have access to. And this is an ongoing thing, whether it's now during COVID or otherwise during normal operation. There's another link here. Impersonation is pretending to be someone else. So it's it's trying to use social engineering skills to convince someone that you are someone else or that you have a different intent. The video listed here is an excellent example of why social engineering will always win and gain you access to a system. Just take a look at it, it's worth watching. The only good defense against this is continuous awareness, continuous training. And there's really not a whole lot else you can do about it. Watering holes is a slightly different approach. Rather than targeting people, it's targeting the locations that people visit. So if I know, for example, that certain persons might like to take business calls at the local Starbucks, I might go hang out at that Starbucks and listen to them. I don't have to target them or their homes, I can just find their watering hole. We can do the same thing in terms of digital equivalencies. So for example, if I know that a person often visits a website and I'm able to somehow gain access to that website in order to plant malware in there, I would have an indirect attack to my victim because I know his behavior or her behavior. And lastly, the most well-known and in many cases most effective way of gaining access to systems is simply by asking people for that access under pretense. Phishing, for example. You know, if I send someone a phishing message, I ask them to disclose information to me that they would otherwise not disclose, or maybe to execute a program on their computer that they would otherwise not execute. And it's done all via email. Phishing can be very, very effective, and especially good phishing messages, which means well-crafted and highly targeted phishing messages, are sometimes really hard to detect and respond to. Again, awareness training, filtering, the use of threat intelligence, and generally being paranoid is a good defense against phishing. We do know, however, from research that if I take a random sample from a population, at least 40, maybe even 50% of people will fall for even a moderately difficult phishing attack. And important to know is that it only takes one person to gain access to a network. One person who divulges their credentials, or one person who installs a piece of malware, is often enough to get into an enterprise network. And when I'm talking about 40% of employees, or maybe if you're doing really well, you're doing this phishing awareness training intensively and correctly, you might get it down to like 15%. But if you have 1,000 employees, 15% is still 150 people, and all you need is one. So phishing is by a lot still the most successful attack vector to get into an enterprise network. Really, the best defenses against those are to limit the privileges that a person has. So really go to least privilege, which means don't run with local administrator privileges. For sure, limit the capabilities of people to install new software on their computers. All kinds of things we could potentially do through block listing applications, however you want to do it. The problem is all of those again will have an impact on usability of that system. So it's always that balance to strike. If we want to catch phishing messages, and so now we're going from what more to how, sometimes you want to have a couple of easy giveaways. So for example, look closely at the sender of the address. Did it come from somebody at adelphi.edu, or maybe did it come from atlefi.edu? Did someone register a domain name that looks really closely to ours but is different? Are they trying to convey a sense of urgency? In many cases we'll see phishing messages talking about, oh no, this needs to do an ASAP, or this needs to be done now, or if you don't do this now you'll go to jail, or whatever it may be. How is the use of language? If there are links in there, hover over those links. Where do they go? Do they go to trustworthy locations? If it is an attachment that you download and the little pop-up comes up and say, oh, to view this attachment, to view this document, you must enable macros. Don't do it. And that means there's program code embedded into your file that will run on your computer and you don't know what it's going to be. In general, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. A specific version of phishing is called spearfishing. It's much more targeted, it's much more crafted. We see them a lot coming in where someone will get an email from what seems to be, say, the vice president or the director, say, hey, I need you to do something for me right now. Can you take care of this while I'm in a meeting? You know, maybe only 3 people get that message. It's well crafted, it's not necessarily out of the ordinary, but it might be not something that this VP would typically do. So all of those are clear warning signs. Social engineering, in all its different ways, shapes and forms, targets humans. And since humans make decisions autonomously and unpredictably, they're often the most effective way to gain access to a system, and as a result, social engineering is very difficult to defend against. Awareness, training, and education are your best tools. You can supplement them with some technologies, but the primary defense will have to come from the people who are being attacked.